Good morning, my little critters. It's Carla, and I'm here again today in my kitchen with a brand new recipe that almost killed me. Full moon apple fritters. I love apple fritters. That is why I put them on the lineup. I was like, fall is coming, Carla. You're working on recipes for the fall. Do an apple fritter. You've never done one. You love apple fritters. I was excited. I was extroverted. I was optimistic. I had belief in myself. Fast forward to a couple weeks later, it's time to fuck around and find out. Let's make these apple fritters. Round one was okay. Round two was really bad. Round three was somehow worse than both of the rounds that had come before it. And it was at that point that I realized I was on the roller coaster that can only be described as the 4 stages of recipe development. The Shakespearean drama, it has highs, it has lows, and there is just so much tension going on. The extrovert, the introvert, the optimist, the pessimist, the believer, the questioner. Will we break through? Will we triumph? Will we get there? We don't know. And I truly did not know until I got to round 5. Round 5 was it. It was like either round 5 is gonna work or the fritters are coming off the lineup. Round 5 worked. The fritters were amazing. And it was upon that day that I realized it was a full moon. So we're gonna find out today if 5 rounds of fritters got me to a recipe that's gonna work every time, or if 5 rounds of fritters got me to a recipe that only works on the full moon. I am once again optimistic despite so much data indicating that I should not be, but I ended up with a fluffy, pulley-aparty, gorgeous, brown sugary, maple glaze dipped, nuggety fritter that I'm really excited about, and I hope they taste the same as they did 3 days ago. I want to give a big thank you to DoorDash for sponsoring this episode. If you didn't already know, DoorDash is so much more than just a food delivery app. You can use DoorDash whenever you're in a pinch, whether you forgot an ingredient or you just don't feel like running one more errand this weekend. Shopping through the DoorDash delivery app is so easy. You can browse convenience stores, grocery stores, pet food stores, all from your phone. You can even schedule your order right from the app. Use code CARLA2024 to get 50% off up to a $10 value when you spend $15 or more at a convenience, grocery, and select retail stores. That's Carla with a C. First step of the full moon fritter is to make the batter. This is a yeasted batter. It's a yeasted donut, which has more of the texture of a cake donut in the end. It's more like an aerated, cakey, tender, monkey bread texture. I have my whole milk. You just want to heat this to warm. So it should feel warm to the touch. If you have a digital thermometer, you're looking for something around 110 degrees. If it gets too warm, it could kill the yeast. So let's talk about the yeast. I am using your regular little packets of your instant, not the double fast acting, just regular active dry yeast. And I need 2 packets. I started with 2 packets in the first round. Then it was crazy. I went down to 1 packet. Then it didn't rise. Actually turned out my yeast was dead on that one, but it really threw me off because I had gone from 2 packets to 1. Dead yeast can happen to you as well. So for this first step, we're gonna make sure the yeast dissolves in the warm milk, and we're gonna work in the large bowl of a stand mixer. If you don't have a stand mixer, you can do this, I would say by hand is better than using electric beaters because we're using the dough hook. So milk goes in, 2 packets of yeast going in. So I want to make sure that all of my yeast granules have been in contact with the milk, and then I'm going to add a little bit of the sugar. So the total amount of sugar is 144 grams, but I'm just going to use a portion of that to help activate. One of the things that we have learned today, in fact, is that if you add all of the brown sugar, it does something that the yeast doesn't like, and then it doesn't rise. So just a little bit of brown sugar to start. I'm gonna measure out the full amount. All right, I'm just gonna set this over there. I want that to sit for about 10 minutes. I wanna make sure that everybody is alive and boublaging, and then I'm gonna do all that before adding the rest of the ingredients. While I was working on the recipe, I called in some help. I watched a lot of videos and looked at a lot of different recipes until I felt like confident I could kind of go off to the races. One of the people whose videos I watched is Turquoise Kitchen on Instagram, had a beautiful fritter recipe, and saw that I was working on a fritter recipe, and I was like, oh, that's so funny. Your video is one of the ones that I watched when I was prepping for this video. And she said, yeah, I love the dough and I loved the fritter, but it was such a fussy dough that I never actually released the recipe. And she said that she found that even like slight variations in the amount of flour that she used made a huge difference in the finished dough. At the time, I was like, just let that wash over me. Later, when I was adjusting from 390 grams down to 300, back to 360, and then trying to figure out in this last stage, I took 30 grams of flour off of the recipe, and maybe that made all the difference. So I really do recommend for this one to have a digital scale specifically for that flour measurement. It would give me more confidence if you used a scale. Ground cinnamon, kosher salt, and I'm also using cardamom. I love the flavor of cardamom with apple. I love cardamom and cinnamon. It's one of those like more aromatic spices that don't become like overwhelming to me, and I think it keeps it like a little bit savory. The other thing that the cardamom does, in addition with the brown sugar, like those play so well together. Also delicious with lemon. There's a little bit of lemon in the glaze, but the cardamom seed and the brown sugar are gonna make this batter pretty dark brown from the jump, so we get a lot of browning later. If you have a spice grinder, you can 100% use it. My mini grinder just died just the other day. And I do like using this mortar and pestle that Andy Baragani gave me many moons ago. But in the middle of development, I also developed a hairline crack in my mortar and pestle. If anyone has insight into moon phases, spice grinding, breaking of cooking vessels, mental breakdowns, highs, lows, despair. I need a quick, just one of those 3-card tarot readings to set me back straight. So this is together, that same dumb fork I used for the yeast. I'm just gonna make sure these spices are distributed in there. If you're staring into the bowl wondering, then it's not right. Like, puffing is a visual thing that everybody can see. All right, so now rest of that brown sugar that I held back, and I'm gonna add 3 egg yolks. You can save your egg whites to make a pavlova or an egg white omelet or something like that with, or you can just be truthful with yourself and let them go. But don't pour egg whites down the drain because they won't go. They have to go into the trash. All right, so now my egg yolks are in, and I want to break up the yolks. I'm not like whisking here for aeration. I just don't want whole egg yolk in there. God, this looks foamy as hell. And now all of the flour is going in here at once. Doing this step in the bowl where essentially all I'm doing here is making sure that the dry and the wet ingredients come together and make something like pretty homogeneous. I don't want to see any more dry bits of flour. I want to make sure I stir to the bottom of the bowl, any loose bits of flour up around the sides, and you're gonna have this like pretty shaggy dough that is still holding together. So at this point, if you don't have a stand mixer, you're gonna go in and continue mixing with a spoon. If you do have a stand mixer, I'm going up to medium speed, and I'm gonna mix for 6 minutes. And in that 6 minutes, what I'm gonna end up with is a dough that is starting to ball up a little bit around the dough hook. And then I have these like stretchy strands that are connecting from that blobby thing in the middle to the edge of the bowl. This looks the way I want it to. Stretchy strands, pulling back. There's still like, some of the strands are breaking, but the batter is starting to look like glossy and shiny. And when you pull the dough hook up, it's gonna make like a shaggy V that breaks. If you pull it up and your V just like chops right off and doesn't do this stretching, probably that means the gluten hasn't been developed quite enough and you don't have these like longer strands. So put it back on and go for a minute or two. I would compare this more to like a pretty sticky muffin batter. You can use any container. I sprayed this down with just a little bit of Pam, but you want something that has a lid. So it could be a bowl that you put a plate over the top. The thing about this dough is that, I don't even know to call it a dough or a batter. It's like, it's heavy and it's sticky. And even though it has yeast in it, it does feel like a little dense. So during the proofing, you're not gonna see like a ton of rise, but the yeast is doing its business and it's gonna look aerated in the middle. If I like scrape into the dough right now, it's just like that, kind of homogeneous, slightly shaggy, very tacky texture. And then we'll look at it again after 90 minutes and you'll be able to see kind of the interior aeration that happens during this resting period. Batter is battering, covering this, put it in a warm spot in your kitchen. I've just been leaving it up here. Set a timer for 90 minutes. And in that time, I'm gonna prep the apples. Okay, so between you and me, when I did the wet ingredients and added the yeast, the way that the yeast looked puffy today was different than the way that the yeast looked puffy every other time I've done this. And I'm just gonna go with it because like I do believe, but it was like, oh, that's what it looks like. Okay, yes, I measured everything right. We will carry on. Another thing that I noticed after the batter was mixed was that batter today is like a little bit wetter than it was the other days. We don't know why. We're now in a waning moon. I don't know where other stars have aligned to, but the batter did look a little wetter. Again, I'm just going with it because a slightly wetter batter might mean more air pocket steam. Holiness happens later, and like I'm all for holiness. So we're gonna move forward with that. I had somebody DM me the other day watching my fritter conundrums, and they were like, oh, this is great. I can't wait for this recipe. Just went apple picking and have like 2 bushels of apples. And I was like, well, I hate to break it to you, but the entire recipe only uses 2 apples and it makes 18 fritters. So that's all we need. I started with 3 and I started by cutting the apples into 1-inch pieces. And in the first round of frying, all the pieces of apple like became free radicals and pushed their way out of the dough, forming like crazy looking eyeballs and googly eyes all over the outside of the fritters. I also made this recipe because my friends at the Yes Apples just send me apples in the fall, which is like one of the best boxes that I get. And they had sent me a sample box of Gala and Macintosh and Honeycrisp. And because I did so many rounds of development, I actually tried each of those apples to see like, do they all hold their shape? Do they, get tender? Do any of them fall apart and become mushy? And all of those apples worked great, both in this like little bit of pre-cooking and then also in the finished fritter frying inside of that, like held together, nice little bites. So I think you have a lot of flexibility as far as spinach on your apples goes. One thing that is important is like you do need to pre-cook the apples a little bit. It takes 5 minutes, and the purpose there is to drive off some of the moisture in the apple, because if all of that steam is getting released inside of the fritter, it could wet the batter and make this like gooey situation surrounding the pieces of apple. So you just have to like cook that off, but it gives us an opportunity to season them and to give them really great flavor. So they're adding something to the finished fritter. I think that was round 2. I was frying them, and I sent a picture after asking for permission, can I ask you an apple fritter question, to Nicole Rucker, who's an amazing restaurateur and pastry chef in LA. LA is a big like apple fritter town. I was like, can I show you what these look like? And I sent her a picture. I was not happy with them at all, but she was like, yeah, those look pretty right. Like that texture, I was freaked out. I was like, they feel too bready. And she was like, no, those look good. And I was like, the apples are just exploding. And I sent her a picture of one of them with like all the apple pieces pushing through. And she was like, that's what apple fritters do. The apple explodes from the batter. It just gave me the confidence to carry on, you know, just hearing like someone else has been where you are and approves what you're doing. A lot of recipe development is winging it and having failures as being like incredibly important to figure out like that didn't work. And so now we will change that and have a better result. If you've been watching the channel for a while, you know that fall is a very challenging time for me. And one of the things that I'm trying this year, like with things that you don't like, you know, you're supposed to do exposure therapy. So like you get over your fear. So I'm trying to do fall exposure therapy. So I went to the Brooklyn Botanical Gardens one day. It was raining, but it was very fallish, and I fall exposed myself and tried to lean into it and like be in nature and like deal with it. This is just a thing that happens, and we have to go through the death to have the reawakening, and everything is a cycle, and you know, it is what it is. And like, yes, the trees are literally throwing leaves off of them because they don't have the energy to carry on. But you know, it's life. Okay, beautiful apples. We're gonna use the induction today because we love Breville and because it's fun. It makes a spooky sound. And I'm gonna warm this up to like medium to medium high. Little bit of butter. That's unsalted. Some recipes I looked at were more brioche and had a very buttery dough. But for here, we've got like brown sugar over there and cardamom, and now we've got like delicious sweet butter that's really seasoning the apples. It all works out. Okay, so these get just a little bit of salt. And I'm just tossing to like coat them with fat and distribute the salt. It smells really yummy. And then some regular granulated sugar. So at this point you can see in the pan the liquid that the apples have released is now evaporating, and you're getting, it almost looks like it's like dry and crispy a little bit, where there's bubbles forming from the sugar and the apple juice that is like the beginning of caramelization. So you're gonna see that bubbling on the surface of the pan. So at this point, everything has evaporated, and I'm going to add a little bit of vinegar. So the vinegar is going to deglaze the pan. It's also going to balance some of this sweetness and give like a nice brightness to the filling. And then that brightness and like a little bit of tang is also picked up with the lemon juice that's in the glaze. So essentially putting the vinegar in there to deglaze the pan, it evaporates almost immediately. It's only a tablespoon in a 10-inch hot skillet. And then I'm using that same plate, and I'm just going to spread these out to cool. And you can 1,000,000% cook the apples a couple of days ahead, let them cool, and then just put them in the fridge in an airtight container and take them out when the dough is proofing so they come back up to room temp. And like, that could be like a 3-day ahead thing. Okay, so another thing that happened is that all of the other apples that I'd used in development had, as I said, had been shipped to me like directly from the tree. The apples that I'm working with today, I think might be last crop, like 2023 fall crop apple, and is not actually 2024 new crop apple. So I do believe, because if I've learned anything, it's that you just can't stop believing, but the texture of them is displeasing to me in a way that I would rather not talk about further. We hit the 90-minute mark. As you can see, the batter looks pretty much the same as it did from the beginning. So you can see that whereas before it kind of made like a smooth, like Play-Doh kind of shiny, tight texture. Now when I scrape into it, it's just like more pliable. There's like more holiness to it and like some very small bubbles. So things have happened even though it doesn't look dramatically different. It's also a lot less sticky. So great. So everything's good. So yeast is alive. You know, we live, we live, we bubble, we aerate, and we come out onto the counter. Super important because as I start to work with this, it's gonna get pretty sticky. It's gonna wanna stick to the surface and itself and my hands and everything else. So this is an extra half cup of flour, and I might use all of that and then some. So be generous about it. Don't worry that like, oh my God, I'm using so much flour. I'm gonna dry this whole thing out. You need it, and you're probably gonna need it on your hands as well. So the other thing that happens in the resting is that the gluten has relaxed and I can pat and press this out. I'm gonna pat this out to a rectangle. I suppose you could use a rolling pin if you really wanted to. I've made a giant hole. It doesn't matter. Let's patch that like that. And we're gonna get into a method that I am calling the chop chop smush. The chop chop smush is like very, very important from the videos that I watched to make that kind of monkey bread pulley apart texture. If you just like fold and cut, you'll get something that's a little bit more like a biscuit. And I should know because the first ones I did looked like smooth, weird, barrel-y, rectangular biscuits. And I didn't like that at all. I'm gonna scrape these out. So what's gonna happen is it's a little bit gonna look like a laminating process where you put your butter in the middle and then you fold and cut and fold and cut, except instead of it being butter, it's apples. And in the chop chop smush, what is happening is that the strands of gluten and the larger pieces of dough are gonna get cut into little pieces that then come back together. And I had watched some videos with the chop chop smush, but when I realized the chop chop smush was real was when I was re-rolling scraps and pushing them back together. And the fritters I made from the smush back together scraps were a better texture than the other ones. And I was like, that's because that was in pieces that came back together that then wanted to be pulled apart instead of a log. Top half of dough, fold over. Floury, we don't care. We can see apples through here. We're just gonna roll with it. I made a hole, I have to live with that hole. Then into letter. This is completely made up, okay? This is just like where I ended up with being like folded a bunch of times and cut it a bunch of times and then see what happens. So now we're in thirds. Apples are squeezing out, so we'll just try to get those back in, but they're gonna come out. And I'm rolling this up, and then I'm making a log. But it's like, now she's a log. I have apples now that are in a bunch of folds, and now I'm gonna pat it out again. But it won't be as big this time, because now the gluten is starting to activate, and I have apples like everywhere. But it's fine. This is kind of what it was like on round 5. Now we want like a 10-inch log, which is roughly what this is. So again, if you're having any troubles sticking hands, apples that flour can help with, just flour it. We've had some folding, we've had some patting, we've had some smushing and some rolling. Now we do chop chop. Okay, so using the bench scraper, I actually want to keep this kind of together, about 1 inch wide. And like, I think the point here is like small pieces that then come back together. Crosswise this way, and then I'm gonna go down the whole length into thirds. Again, made up. So you could do a different small shape, and I think it's kind of all good. This is pretty wet because I have squishy apple squishing through. And now I have all these like little pieces. See, these little guys? They're all folded and have apples in and have dough folded over. And now I'm gonna kind of use the bench scraper, little chop chop, That's the chop. And this is the smush. Chop, smush. Just get it into something that now you can roll out to a pretty long log. Yeah, about 1 inch thick. Chop, smush, and now we roll, okay? Just go with it. Not everything has an explanation. Do the tides have an explanation? Some people could probably explain it to you, but it truly can't be explained, okay? Neither can this. This is just a thing that happened. It happened in my life, and it worked out great, and now it's gonna happen in yours. And if it's too hard to work with, chop it in half. I just want this to be about 1 inch around, so it doesn't all have to be one giant log. It's not like I'm putting a whole log in the fryer, she said to herself as a way to make herself feel better about what was happening. But I believe it. I believe what I'm saying. Confidence in the kitchen just comes from like believing. You just gotta believe. And some of it is believing that like even if it's not quite right, it's still gonna be good. I know it's gonna be good because like I'm a trained professional and the host of this show, but I just want you to know that. Okay, so now I have some approximately 1 inch high logs. I feel like they're a little bigger than that, but that's cool. This is when the batter turns into a fritter. Okay, right now. It's gonna happen. It's gonna transform. See that it's a log of batter? It's a fritter. And you turn it on its side, okay? If you don't turn it on its side, I don't like the shape as much. Going across, turn them on their side on some flour. So the yield in the recipe is 18. This is quite a few more than 18, and that's because I wanted to see what would happen if I cut them a little bit thinner. So some of these are a little thinner and some of these are a little taller. And now we'll see if like we like the smaller fritter or we like the slightly larger fritter, because fritters should not be size discriminated against, and nor should anybody else. Okay, so a couple of things were happening there. One is that I think that the mushier 2023 apple was disintegrating a little bit faster than the other apples I used during development, and that was contributing to a smushiness that I was not 100% prepared for. So flour fixed it, question mark. We don't know. The other thing that is 100% my fault that I did wrong was when I was cutting crosswise, I went way too thin with some of them because I forgot that in the first stage you did it 1 inch across, and then the second one at the end, it should have been 2 inches across. So now we have some that are smaller and we have some that are bigger. And while that wasn't my intention, that is my reality. So we will keep being alive through this reality. This is a 4 to 5 quart Dutch oven that I have set up with my fry oil. We're heating this to 350. 375 is too hot. 365 is a little too hot. When I started at 375, that first batch, it just was like too dark on the outside and then gooey in the middle. It is important to have a digital thermometer or a candy thermometer. They're not expensive, but you do want to know what your fry temp is at. That's going to take a little while to come up, overheat. In the meantime, I'm making the glaze, early versions of the fritter, dusted in just regular granulated sugar. They were cute. They had a nice look. People wanted a glaze. And when I say people, I mean Cosmo. And I am just giving these a classic royal icing. So confectioner sugar that is moistened with fresh lemon juice. If you didn't have fresh lemon juice, I would recommend use apple cider here, which will be like similar, and we have some cider in the apples, so that could be nice. I just liked the flavor a little bit better, so that's what I called for. And then maple syrup, equal amount, and a pinch of salt. And this makes kind of a heavy glaze, which I think is really nice in this case because you want something that doesn't just like thin out and run right off. Like I like being able to see the glaze. I like for it to have some of its own like structure. And in order for it to be that, it needs to be kind of thick. So this looks good. Okay, we're right at 350. And I'm gonna go about 5 at a time. As you put the fritters into the fryer, remember there will be some bubbling. You're not dropping them from a high height, but you're also not letting them splash. And I'm gonna keep an eye on my timer. These are gonna take about 1.5 to 2 on each side. So I'm going for like a nice golden brown, and then I'm gonna turn them over and finish cooking them through. Cute little donuts. And things that I like is I'm seeing puffiness, I'm seeing cragginess, I'm seeing like parts that as the steam is coming through and the batter is cooking, it's making like a crevice on top. That's 1.5. So I'm gonna flip them. And you can also turn them more than once. Like if you turn them and you're like not super psyched with the color, just, it's totally fine to do them more than once. Oh, these are cute. Okay, these are smaller than what I have photographs of, but they're really cute. I like them. And actually, Cosmo told me to make donut hole sized ones. And I said, no, I don't want to do that. So who's a witch now? Or a warlock? Well, yeah, these are cute. They're a little rounder. Like the last batch were very oval, and these are a little more round. But again, this is what Cosmo wanted. These need to sit for 5 minutes before I can glaze them. They're too hot to touch and it will melt the glaze too fast. What I like is nuggetiness. I'm talking about like this texture. So this, like, this guy wants to free associate into my face. They taste really good. It's crazy how the flavor of the apple goes through the whole batter. Tender and delicious. Okay. First of all, they're delicious. Second of all, they taste like apple through and through. Third of all, these are a little smaller than I want them to be. Fourth of all, love the glaze. Timing is terrific. These ones are a little bit bigger. And right after I glaze them, I'm gonna finish off with a pinch of flaky salt. These are doing it for me. From a visual perspective, the thing I wish was different was that I didn't cut them so small. These are like, I don't think you could charge $6 for these in a bakery because of their size. I think you would be like $2.50 to $3. Please a sponge. They're cooked through. It was 1.5 to 2. I'm gonna go and open a donut shop. We're gonna fry the rest of these. BRB. Also, not for nothing, but I did get attacked by a mosquito in the middle of the night. And it was horrible, and it had bitten me all over my hands, and it had bitten me on my neck, and then it was just like skydiving into my ear. So there was a period around 3:30, 4 a.m. where I was like violently smacking myself in the ear and the face to try to kill this mosquito, which pieces of it might be still left in my ear. And another thing that happened, and this could be premonitions because in the way that rings are very symbolic, but also in the night I woke up and I was uncomfortable, Princess and the Pea flashback style, uncomfortable. What am I lying on top of? This hurts me. Is it a thorn? What is it? And my gold ring that I went to bed with it on this middle finger had fallen off in the night and I had rolled over on it. It was underneath my shoulder blade. Princess and Peeing me. I had mosquitoes murdering me and I had a gold ring stabbing me in the back. So whatever needs to be put in the drama, there will be a scene where like someone is stabbed with a gold ring. And that person is me.